Want to thank everybody for showing up to the panel 4 of Lost in Translation. Today we're going to be discussing the editorial side as well as building studios at your home. That's something that seems, because of COVID, a lot more people were starting to build editorial and mix setups at home to be able to support all the projects that are coming up, especially some of the studios were shut down. We're going to be talking about non-theatrical Atmos, and also we're going to be talking about setups and templates. Anyway, so let me first welcome everybody. And this is an organization called EIPMA. EIPMA is the Entertainment Industry Professionals Mentoring Alliance. It's made up of 15 organizations such as NARIS and CAS and MPSE and many others. And the reason we do this is to be able to inform and educate people on the issues that are transforming our industry today. Now, although these subjects are very much on the professional level, we believe that students and non-professionals viewing this will be able to help understand the complexities that are facing us, but also, in addition to students, a lot of industry people that are doing it, because we're all learning, especially now as everyone's starting to work from home, you know, what are you doing and how are you doing it? So we invite everybody out there who's watching this to visit our member organizations' websites. It's important because that's how we're made up. And also become members, as you know, if you're a mixer and CAS and editorial and MPSC and music and just all these great organizations. So at the end, we're going to post these all on the EIPMA. EIPMA, by the way, is EIPMA on the YouTube channel. So you'll be able to find all these videos in about a week and a half after we do it live. The other 3 are already up there, and they're amazing. It's been a massive success. Also, if you want, with EIPMA, because we do a lot of mentoring, go to the website, which is EIPMA.org, EIPMA.org. Okay, here we've got an amazing group of people. Many people I've worked with. So we've got Jeff Roubaix, we've got John Taylor, we've got Jamie Scott, we've got Mandel Winter, and Lyle Engel. All right. So we're going to talk, like I said, about things, but what I want to do is each person, I want you to introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about what you've done, and also discuss a little bit about your setup. So why don't we start with Mandel? You seem to be next to me on the Zoom here.
I'm Mandel. I'm a supervising sound editor. I'm based out of Sony, but I do work everywhere. My home setup, I am rocking a Mac Mini and a 5.1 JBL LSR system. And then I have a room at Sony as well, and I go in there just because I have to get business done face-to-face from time to time. So maintaining 2 rigs and my laptop rig for when I'm on stage. So
nice. Lyle?
Yeah.
I'm 714 here at my little laboratory. During COVID, we did the first season of Flight Attendant completely remote, all Zoom meetings, but that season wasn't Atmos, I guess. But now I'm working on a thing with Dane Davis right now, and I'm doing all the design for effects and I'll be mixing it. So I put it all together from the ground up in Atmos in my mix session. So by the time I show up on the stage, it will be mixed like magically. So, and you know, as far as the template, it's what I mix out of. And we'll do it at Warner Brothers like that. Oh, my system is a 8-core i9 MacBook Pro, which is a little odd, but I have 2 of them. I have one here at the studio and I have an identical one that I use at home. So if for some reason my system blows up and I'm on a deadline, I can run to my house and grab the other one, plug it in, good to go.
Excellent. Jamie.
Hey, how's it going? Let's see. Yeah, I've been working in post. I guess I started in games in the early '90s, and that's how I originally met Scott. Was we worked on a couple games together, and then I sort of gradually moved into post and whatever. Now I mostly just work on shows and movies and that sort of thing. I'm mostly working for Skywalker right now. That's probably going to continue for many moons at this point. But I'm working on the Mario Brothers movie with Randy Tom, and we're kind of co-sound designing that movie. So as far as my Atmos thing, I took a little hiatus and was working with a group from Google, probably around 2014, and they were experimenting in VR, trying to accomplish some storytelling goals in VR to sort of see how that worked. And it was very experimental, and we did a bunch of VR shorts. But during that time, they were sort of rebirthing ambisonics and binaural playback. And so I got into this whole thing with them with object-oriented mixing. And we did, I think, like 12 little short films, mostly animated, that were VR and that sort of exemplified this object-oriented kind of audio. And it was all binaural playback. And I got the idea of like, I would love to do this in speakers. So that was sort of when Dolby Atmos started to become a thing. And so I transitioned my studio here into 714. All my speakers are installed inside the walls. I did that myself over many Saturdays, just drilling and.
It was fun watching all your posts as you're like, I'm not sure what I'm doing, but I'm trying.
Yeah. Yeah, but fortunately, I did it right in that I contacted Dolby before I installed everything, and I asked them, do you guys do any consulting? And they were like, yeah, we'll send someone out. And so they sent out Andy, and we sat here and talked about goals and the things that I wanted to do. And this was very early on. I would say probably 2018, I think was when I did it. So he put in all my dimensions and my speakers and all that stuff into his little thing.
Art system, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think it was commercially available at that point, but showed me exactly where to put the speakers. So then I did the work of doing that, and then 6 months later, it was all installed, and he came over.
What computers are you using now?
I started out with doing the dual computer system, and then I got the Mac Pro, and it was like it was just power to spare. So I was just like, I wonder what would happen if I put this RedNet card in the Mac and cycle it back through the matrix, and it worked famously. So that's what I've been doing ever since. It's been a couple years running, and I do a one system full 128 channels round trip on the same system.
Yeah, and then what speakers are you using?
My front speakers are these Pelonis mains that I bought from him many moons ago. Chris Pelonis designed my studio, so as part of the deal, he gave me a deal on his speakers, and they're amazing sounding speakers. So I've had them for amazingly 20 years, and I've never heard their equal, so I've never had any reason to replace them. And then in the walls, I use these Beale Street in walls, which are self-contained. They have their speakers. They're in wall, but they have a cabinet enclosure around them, so they cycle the bass out back, and they actually sound really good. I can actually pan my camera over. So this is my studio. It's just it's small, 714, but I've got the front projector, short
Nice.
front projector, and 10-foot screen, and it works really well.
Cool. And then Jeff, Talk to
Yeah,
us. You've been
yes.
upgrading your setup.
Yeah. So at home, the speakers 708 Ps. There's 708s down at Sony. I have kind of a mirror studio down at Sony. They're putting in the rest of the speakers so it can be Atmos. The surrounds, I just did 308 Ps because it was easy.
Yeah.
They work good enough. And the computer is a Mac Studio, which has worked out pretty good. The first month or so, it was a little exciting, but I kept the other system running just in case. And now it's just, works great. And I have the Dolby renderer just running internally within that. So it just Pro Tools and it are just kind of working together.
Excellent.
So
And John, who I worked at his place just recently. John, tell us a little bit about.
I have I'm a re-recorded mixer. I features primarily, and I work on the Hitchcock Theater at Universal. I built a home stage during COVID. Worked out perfectly because what happened was March 23rd, 2019, we got sent home from Fast and Furious 9. And I came home, and I've always had a music studio here, but I got a call to mix a film. And they said, can you mix a film at your home? I said, sure, I can mix a film. Well, at the time, all I had was an iMac and 6328 Ps, my music setup, and mixed the film. So made a little extra scratch, and then decided to rearrange my room a little bit. So basically, my room here matches Universal stage, other than it's a 90-foot throw at Universal. This is only 20, but I went with all Meyer Acheron speakers. I'm a 916 system. And I went with a full S6 like I have at work. I went with, I have two 7.1 playbacks, one 7.1 recorder. I have a separate renderer. I have 24 terabyte NAS solid state, and then a 48 terabyte hard disk drive backup. So I back everything up and basically kind of mimic the way I do things at work. But the coolest thing about doing this was my sons and my wife built everything in here ourselves. Since I have a workshop with a plasma cutter and CNC and mills and lathes and all that stuff, and know how to build pretty much anything, it's just been a blast. But mostly I would say putting the electronics together was just the best part of it. But so I kind of went all out. That's not how I started. I started with wanting to do 708s, and once I put the speakers far enough away, I was like, I kind of need the bigger sound. And then that's when I decided to go ahead and go all out and match the stage as close as possible, because I do a lot of pre-dubbing here. I do a lot of near fields here. I do a lot of mixing here. We mixed a lot of the film Bardo that just is coming out fairly soon. Did a lot of mixing of that here. The bigger scenes were mixed here that took the automation straight to the film and used it. So kind of went all out, if that answers.
And I'll say that we just got finished also working on Pinocchio, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio.
Yep.
and it was great because we did all the near field over at John's place, and he also has the ability to emulate different kinds of speakers a little bit with system. So in addition to Myers, he had something that simulated the 708s.
Yeah.
So some of those characteristics, which I thought was great. But no, and it was great translation, and it was wonderful being able to go from a large theatrical environment to a smaller environment to really understand how that was going to play, and then also play stuff through the TV and et cetera, et cetera. For my setup, so I got two rooms I'm using. I'm using Barefoots. I got Barefoot 27s in my Burbank place, and in my Santa Cruz place, I've got Barefoot 45s with bass extensions. I'm in the midst of transforming from a Mac Studio, which Jeff turned me on to, and so I'm not quite doing the pain yet. I'm going to wait for December, to take the month and just all my 4,000 plugins to reinstall, and I figure, you know, Native Instruments will take a week just to itself. But and then let me think, at the office, I've got the Intel, one of the giant cheese grater Mac Pros, and for the surrounds, I have in Burbank, I've got the 708s pretty much around the room. And then over here, I've got a 7.1, it's all barefoot. So I got footprints around me, and then I've got the 45s in front. So what's really great about this is that everybody has come up with different solutions, different economics. There's no right, there's no wrong. It's just how people have been solving issues based on, we couldn't go into the office. So everyone, a lot of you guys work for big studios, and those studios were literally shut down. The independents was still running somewhat. So right now, you either sit at home, do nothing for 2 years, or you find a solution, and you start finding ways to work either as a mixer or as a sound designer. So let's start getting into the questions, and then we'll just kind of, you know. So real quick, is anybody using second computers for their recorder slash renderer, or is everybody doing it on a single one? Okay. So I know that let me ask Lyle this, because I know, Jamie, you've got a muscular computer. So Lyle, when you're going through a render, are you just doing monitoring on it, or are you mixing and creating ADM files? Help us understand how, because you're using a MacBook Pro. So help me understand how you're doing that.
I'm just using DAPs to run just for monitoring in my place. Everything will eventually end up over on a stage at Warner, or maybe at Signature. I kind of hop around a little bit. We're like the Vagabond crew that doesn't have its own home stage. We're working on that. But it's all monitoring, basically, just so I can put things where they need to go. And, you know, my room is not tuned by Dolby or anything. I do have an amp that I inherited from Jamie, and I'm using also the Beale Street speakers up top on his suggestion as well, because I think they were using them in some of the rooms over at Dolby or something. Jamie knows that story. But anyway, they're working well for me. I actually, they have a pendant enclosure that you can get for them. So I always get thrown out of studio locations and have to find another one real quick, sometimes within like a week of mixing something. But these little pendants, put the Beale Street speakers in and just put a hook in the ceiling, hang it there, you're done. So I can take this whole thing down and put it back up in a day if I have to. I just upgraded to Monterey 1251, and I used the for the Native Instruments, just use their little installer thingy. It'll help you out a lot. It might take a while, but you know, everything that I do ends up going to another stage that has been set up by Dolby. So it's kind of a fun game to play the translation between my room and then different stages, you know. It's kind of interesting to see how it all goes. And I really prefer to mix in my room. I mean, it's not very big. It's 20 by 15. It's basically a single car garage that I found freestanding in Burbank. It's like this amazing little place that I found, but it works great. I just have like curtains I put around for treatment, and I have a floating cloud here because I cut vocals as well. I play music too. So to get rid of the standing waves when I first walked in here, was just like doing, doing, doing. So, but the MacBook Pro keeps up. It's amazing. I was using an iMac before that, but I will eventually jump to the M1, M2 family. But I got a a late model, like 2019 is my laptop. So I got a couple of years left in it. I was trying to use the brand new Pro Tools, and I was getting a little sluggish operation from it. Now I don't know if it's because it's tuned more going towards the M1 family, and I'm kind of left behind a little bit. But I'm using, what is it, 2217, I think is the number. Is that the right number for Pro Tools? It's like one version back, and it runs great on my because I'm Intel. So I wanted some of the new features of the brand new one, like there's some cool stuff, the Aura and all that stuff, but it was just you know, when you're trying to work and get into a rhythm of things, when you're just waiting on the beach ball and the scrolling, is like, it's just no good. So
Oh yeah,
finally,
I mean, my system's a Stone Mojave. I mean, it's like, just because I know it works. And
Mhm.
once to get to Monterey, that's you know, it's really not the Pro Tools version as much as the operating system, because Pro Tools may work fine, but the plugins don't work, you know, that kinds of stuff. So let me ask this, because I'm going to wait for John on this because I know some of the answers, but maybe not. Actually, John, you can jump in. Okay. So you're at your home, you got a family, they're living their lives. You have a sub, maybe more than one, and you've got neighbors, and then maybe you've got a 2-story, you're probably on the ground floor and people are above you. Help us understand. Hey, honey, I'm working at home, and and now, you know, things are rattling and the dog's freaking out, and you know, what have you done to deal with working at home? Anybody? Mando, you have anything?
It's a work in progress. I know my daughter would knock on the door and be like, "It's a little intense. Can you take a break?" So, and she's only 9, so yeah, okay. And I tend to work on kind of some dark material, so yeah, it's a work in progress. I mean, you got to just negotiate with the family and say, "Hey, Dad's got to work. Maybe I'll put cans on for a little while and do that, and give them a break, and then go back to the mains, and
Yeah.
just
It's
give
a
and
good way
take."
to dust the house, because the sub just vibrates everything, and everything just
It does.
lifts, and you know, yeah. What about?
And my room's pretty small too, so the bass builds up in here pretty quick.
Wow.
Yeah,
And then did you get any bass traps for that, for the room?
I did. Yeah, I had to, just to start absorbing stuff, because it
I did, for
was a
these
little too
little
much.
things, the pretty things behind me are all 4-inch bass traps. For that reason,
Oh, those
because
are
it's
great.
like, oh wow, look, sub.
Yeah.
Jeff, how about you?
Yes. Well, I've always had a setup of sorts to work from home for various reasons, family, travel, you know,
Late nights, weekends.
oh, whatever. Yeah. Just adds flexibility. So they've kind of they got used to it growing up. Now my wife and I are, you know, alone in the house. So the funniest thing I had, like right next to me is a guest room, and my father-in-law, luckily he's pretty hard of hearing, but I had to do a kind of a middle of the night 3 a.m. up to 3 a.m. kind of thing, quickie mix on a temp mix for a show, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And you know, like just a temp mix for, you know, it's like my 3rd day on the project, and they're like, do this. So the next day, my daughter pointed out to me that on this website Nextdoor, who, like, it's your neighbors, and apparently and I had a, you know, a window open, and so sound was getting out more than I realized, and they're like, did anyone else hear like screaming and chainsaws, and was there like a murder taking place? And you know, like there was this whole discussion thread on, did anyone else hear that? I'm out here in Agua Dulce. It's kind of, I thought, the middle of nowhere, but not middle of nowhere enough. So that's been the most interesting thing lately. Otherwise, it's somewhat compatible with you know, my wife's at the other end of the building, so we're okay.
What, John, I mean, I know, Jamie, you've got like a different, it's decoupled from the house, but John, so that at least gives you base traps and air travel. John, I mean, he's got like the door behind him opens to the house and you're like, wow.
Yeah, I have three 18-inch Meyer subwoofers on the floor, coupled actually, because it worked best. It's phenomenal. And I also have four 12-inch subwoofers in the ceiling. And I mix at 85 when I'm doing things that are going to be going to the Hitchcock. It translates very, very, very well. And it gets loud, and that's a fact. Luckily, I do have a pretty large place here, and my wife has other places she can go. But because I have 3.5 feet below me and I have 16-foot ceilings, it doesn't totally resonate the whole place at all. I mean, I don't have any resonation in the room. The room was built correctly, so I killed the whole room and then added life afterwards to get the reflections that I wanted, to completely diffused reflections. And but there are a couple scenes, like there's this one scene in film, well, actually there's a couple things in Pinocchio that'll rock this house, but that was near field, so we were down at about 80 on that one. But for
But you know me, I like to crank it up.
yeah, you do. But for another film, there was just this one scene that it's kind of like a sunrise, but it's full force, and it was probably midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, and my wife texted me, "Is everything okay?" So you have to live with it a little bit. I do have space to build another bigger stage if I wanted to, and I'm weighing that out, but I probably won't do that. This space is so good right here that it's like, why bother? It's so nice, and I get to do everything I need to do. I have the ability, so I'm pretty stoked. But the low end is you really don't hear it outside the house. It's great, but inside the house, yeah, it moves.
Yeah, here what I end up doing is I got a master bedroom above me and the TV room on the backside of me, and I used a quiet rock and staggered studs and filled it, and we even clay filled all of the outlets just to really create an air gap. And so it doesn't leak really all that much. I'm very freaked out about putting any screws in the walls just because of that reason. I just don't want to penetrate the seal that we have on it. And she can't hear me above, interesting enough, because it's a room within a room and it's not touching. And even that's got staggered studs, except for if I hit the low end, like I never like to do, then we have a fireplace mantle on the other side of the wall. And on the project before I did Pinocchio, I guess things would just started slightly vibrating and could have come out and they go, wow, everything's kind of weirdly placed. And she said, no, that's you. You're just sitting there. She was taking things off like, okay. They were all just slightly moving around a little bit occasionally. And, and the dog just looked very nervous all the time. And so the sub moved in that room, but strangely enough above me, it ended up working out. And I think I ended up getting the sub. I think that Jamie recommended the SVS, after going through 3 or 4 of them, and they kept breaking. I like my sub, but hey, I found one and it works to this day. So,
Nice.
so far so good.
You mean you got a good SVS?
What's say?
You ended up getting a good SVS?
Yeah, they upgraded me because I think they got so embarrassed. I think it wasn't having to do with me, to be honest. I think it was having to do with the shipping. It came in a giant crate. It was, it was took 2 people to carry it, but the thing was, and a dolly, but like the studios are never open, and you got to kind of maneuver and contort your body while holding 200 pounds or whatever. And then trying to place it. So it's always fun. And I will say with John said he has a little bit of a shop, and he has a shop. So one of the things that was amazing, John's got some amazing talents that he can build anything he wants. and he's built some amazing just things that you would never think. Oh, I just need a like a U joint of something, and then and place it. He just manufactures it.
Yeah.
And
I'm
so
envious.
yeah, I mean, I walked in and all I want to do is record his shop because it competes with a lot of big shops. It's the real deal. But that's it, and it's fascinating because what I love about all this is that everybody's coming up with solutions. So how are you? Like I'm thinking about trying to boost ceilings, but now obviously with ceilings, you got weight issues, you got vibration issues, you've got all these different. Then you've got what was the house built for? Do you have long 2x6s that go the length of the house? So now if you start vibrating those, the whole house just starts ringing. Has anybody been dealing with any ceiling issues? Or not? Okay, so there we go.
No.
Jamie, anything on your side when you started mounting them? Any resonation?
My I didn't know much about studio construction when I built this place, and like I said before, it's been 20 years. So I hired Chris, and he knew all of the details of what's going to happen 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So he designed the place with that in mind. My ceiling is actually just one giant bass trap. It's it's an open cavity, and it's got a frame with the speakers and all that stuff. And then 702 is my ceiling. I don't have any drywall or anything like that.
Right.
And my back wall is a bass trap as well. And this garage is a room within a room. Like when we originally found this house, we bought it off of the president of Schecter Guitars. Can't remember the
Nice.
guy's name, but he was in a band in the 80s. They were like a one-hit wonder band, and they recorded all their stuff in this room. So the shell was actually already in place, room within a room, and there's an air gap in between.
Nice.
So, when you close the door, there is no sound outside, and there is no sound from outside coming in. It's pretty remarkable how airtight it is. And I have, dual SVS subs, and these things they move so much air. It's amazing to me that you can't hear it outside.
Wow.
Yeah.
So now let me ask this. So what have you been finding? Oh, actually, lastly, before we move on, Lyle, okay, you keep moving from place to place.
Man.
Are you running all passive monitors, and what are you doing with cables? Are you just drawing them on your ceiling, or how you hide them behind a cloud?
I hide them behind, I have curtains actually that go all the way around.
Yeah.
Is just the most easiest economical way that I've found to treat a room. Because if you build a bunch of stuff in there and then your landlord says you can't stay because because of COVID, or oh my God, I worked in this one place where they were demolishing the entire building and the whole interior. They were ripping it all out, and except for my one little place where my studio was, and the landlord really liked me and wanted to accommodate me, but eventually he said, this is too tough. I just want to empty the building and let whoever comes in build whatever they want in it. So you got to be out in 2 weeks. And I was in the middle of a huge project with Dane, in the middle of COVID. So I was trying to find a quick spot to move to. And then I went over and I was over at West Wind for about 6 months. They helped me out. And then I found this place. But having the curtains around is great, because if you want to get to your cables, you just pull the curtains back and there's all your stuff right there. You can easily get to it. It's not buried in channels and all that kind of stuff. So it's all about economics for me, really, man. The most painless way to do it, I have a mix match of speakers. I have my sides are my original Mackie HR 824s that I bought in 92. They're still hanging in there, but because they're 8-inch, I pair them with my LSR JBL 5.1. That's all passive with the JBL subwoofer. And then I have an amp couple of amps. One that I got from Jamie. He was kind enough, like, oh, anybody want this amp? I'm going to leave it on my porch. And I was like, right here, dude. So I went over, and I'm running that for 2 of my tops, and I have a Crown amp for 2 of my tops. So the tops are passive, and everything else is active.
Cool. You know, it's interesting. I've been very fortunate for the last 7 years. There was a composer named Mike Post.
Yeah.
And he pretty much wrote all the music for the 80s, every TV show you can imagine. I'm in his old room. I'm in his old mix room that I've turned into a design room. And I wanted to install Atmos, and I started bringing in all these companies that basically install that. And the acoustics in the room are pretty amazing because it's a vanity room. So, you know, he had all the money, he built whatever he wanted.
Yeah, I've seen. Pretty nice.
Yeah. But the problem we ran into is, how do we cut into the ceiling? And nobody knew. So everyone's bringing ladders and they're looking at the ceiling, but because the ceiling is all these panels that are up there, nobody could really see what's above it to figure out weight load and all different issues. So, you know, we don't own the building, we don't own the studio. So we took a different route. We ended up getting I call them a disco truss or DJ truss, a little thinner than when I was at Technicolor. They installed a massive lighting truss. So big truss, very small speakers. It looked ridiculous. So now we went in sort of an H. It's 2 trusses, and then they're connected in the center that holds 705s. And we were able to do it that way because we couldn't breach the ceiling. Everybody was too nervous. The guys who owned it were like, if you break it, you fix it. And we just thought that could be more money than we ever anticipated. So we decided to go the mobile route. And that is just a truss was very expensive. We had to spray black, and then, you know, it doesn't resonate at all. So it's really nice. And so that was another solution. So for those people that can't cut into your ceilings, or are too nervous, or the people they live with will allow that. Hey, honey, can I cut on the ceiling? No. You know, that might, you know, that's another alternative. So let me ask this. So, you know, it's interesting as we look at the Atmos formats. You know, Atmos theatrical, you know, is its own beast. But now we start getting into consumer-based Atmos. And on the panel, especially the music guys, it was fascinating to see what they were talking about. You know, because are we dealing, you know, 946? Are we doing 714, 724? A lot of them are doing 512, 712. How have you, when you've been asked to deliver non-theatrical formats, what do you think about the +2, rather than, you know, whether it's 5.1 +2 or 7.1 +2? Because we're only as good as what we're being played back on. And I know Scott Kramer is going to be on our next panel from Netflix. But I just wanted to get your takes and what your experiences are with things that are not 714, 724, 964, you know, all the different scales. Anybody chime in? Anybody have any thoughts?
I'll say something. I have kind of a unique perspective on this because I do mix in Atmos, and I also contribute to other mixers, and I've seen sort of a very wide gambit of theatrical and home theater. The stuff that I've mixed here, I usually take to a stage. I'll mix it here basically, and I'll take to a stage to do playbacks and notes, basically. And sometimes I'll adjust tiny little things for the most part, but the translation to a larger room is really good. But that doesn't really matter in home theater because, like you said, you're only as good as the playback system. So if it sounds good in a smaller room like this, sounds good in a bigger room, those are my 2 check marks. I do kind of check the down mixes to make sure that they sound good, because I would imagine that that would be 98% of all listeners. Um, so it's actually quite a bit of labor to accommodate that 2% of people who actually have Atmos home systems, if it is even 2%.
And it's interesting because as we all do, a lot of us do films, and a lot of film people now are crossing over into, I'm going to call streaming. The sort of TV, there's streaming, which is kind of the new place, and then films, and both those people are jumping into the middle of this new way of delivering formats. And in the music, before I did this, I used to do music, and and you would do a mix, and you get your mix going, you run to your car with your cassette, you pop it on, you listen, how does this thing translate? And then you go, okay, let me go back and make some adjustments. Okay, so now you're in your beautifully acousticized room, and you know it, and you've got soft stuff in the ceiling, maybe diffusers, all of that. Well, which means as a sound bar, it's the worst place to hear anything, because you can't play off the reflections that the sound bar is doing. Do you have a sound bar set up somewhere in a square room that you take a listen to what you've done, and then run to that and say, let me see how this thing's translating? Anybody?
I don't, but I should actually have that. I think that's kind of a significant last step sanity check. I did the show Lost Ollie, where I mixed the whole thing in Atmos, and at the last stage of it, I did end up taking it around to friends' places and checking the Atmos mix in other studios and other, and so I did get to hear it on a soundbar just to do that last check. But my next step was to get a soundbar and put it in the house so that I could have that self check last stage thing. And then I took a sound design gig, and I haven't had the chance to do that. But that is in my future, to have that last minute sanity check.
I like, John, how we mixed into your place, even though it wasn't Atmos, but we were mixing on your TV.
Yeah, the soundbar has been something on my mind for the last probably 4 or 5 months, because it is a great last minute check. Whether I'll live and die by that, I doubt it, but it would be a nice thing to check. And Atmos for home is crazy. I've always heard, some systems play back objects better. Sometimes if you have too many objects, some objects won't track right. There's a lot of different things about, how you mix and what you marry, what you change. We mix 712 stems, but we never put anything in the 0.2. So it's basically 7.1 with objects. So which translates and scales down to pretty much whatever. Of course, the stage is a 9-ring stage, and here I'm point source, so I don't have any arrays at my home. But it's always amazing in every theater that I ever go to, regardless of what size, how well the DCP, takes care of the Atmos and the objects. And if you don't have a ton of objects, like I don't just take all the music. I know some people do that. I don't take all the music. I'm very specific with what I do put in objects. So, and so was Frankie on the effects. So we never have that many objects going at the same time. And I've never heard anything ever, have a problem tracking or crunching down.
So do you feel then that Atmos, and this is for everybody, is really 7.1 plus fun stuff? It's really a 7.1 mix, and then sprinkle the ceiling, season it to taste?
I absolutely.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
ahead.
For the wide, I mean, for me and music, the wides, of course, the ceiling's important to everybody, but I love the wides for music, just to be able to just have that little bit of extra space and a little bit of extra brightness, because you're not behind the screen, in the theatrical world. And because I do have a screen here with my speakers behind it also, even though I do go up and down and change the EQ, to just get another listen to what's going on without the screen. But I do believe that's what I believe. Yes, exactly that, Scott. I do believe it is 7.1 with fun stuff.
Yeah, I actually do send my beds to the render as quad 7.1s. I don't, and then
Yeah.
my returns, I have my reverb returns. I send to a bus that are actually 4 objects. So, and they return at the first 4 objects of each food group.
So you do the ceiling just basically as a quad, not a 7-1 object, but you're taking your objects and just, you know,
Rendering.
No, they
rendering.
are objects. They are
So, but
objects.
are you rendering to a 7-1 or a 4?
My beds are 7.1.
Right. But when you render your objects, are you?
Oh, well, I didn't do that. Like on the last thing that I did, Picture Shop did all of the actual final renders. I sent them my ADMs with my template is 92 channels, so I've got 4 7.1 beds, and then the rest are all objects. And then whatever they do, I know that they embedded that down for final distribution because that's what Netflix does. But and I would do that as well. I would probably render it to a 7.1 4 or something like that, and just send a single bed.
Mhm, mhm.
Jeff,
Or
do you what's say, John?
I know a lot of people do that. That way they don't have to worry about, chunking up a computer's, playback or something like that, or a receiver or whatever. It's just, it plays, it's much simpler on the system. So it's more accurate. So I've heard a
It
lot of
becomes
people
more of
do
a
it.
monitoring, and then at the end you just kind of render that
Yeah.
mix.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
I separate out my stems and food groups because of the way that I bring the stuff back in, because I keep I use my system as a recorder, and I have everything separated so that I can do all of my deliverables and client
Right.
records and all that stuff. I just have that in my sessions, and then what I have recorded on the recorder is that, and then whatever goes from there, they have all of the options. It's great for archival.
Sure.
John, you do something interesting, and then we'll get to everybody else as well, with Bill.
Mhm.
Something that Bill Meadows, who's their mix tech.
It's kind of with all of Universal, because we
I like it. I mean, I thought
streaming is new, very, very new for us, on, at Universal. And basically, because there are always going to be notes, the QC is going to find something, and you can't just blow it off. You have to look at it regardless of who the director is or whatever. You have to look at it, and you're always going to say, yeah, this is a really good note and I got to fix this. Well, that's after you've delivered everything. So we've already delivered the ADM, we've delivered the stems, we did the damp, we did blah blah blah, all this stuff, and then the M&E, which is the more difficult part. But what happened was I tried to do all the deliverables here, and when it came back, it was a problem because we've been solid booked for 9 months now, and almost every weekend. So when it's time to do an update, it's bad. So Blue Wave, which is sort of the deliverable side of Universal, I talked to them about how I was doing things, and asked them if they can jump on board and take care of the back end. And so we built a really great relationship where I print everything here other than the damp. So I'll print the stems, do the print masters on the Atmos 5.1 and 2 track, and then I send it to them. And basically, I'll send them the PTX and all the new audio. And then when there's an update, we update at Universal to the stems that we made on the stage at Universal. And when we update those stems, basically when they open the near field session in Blue Wave, it's already updated. All they have to do is punch in, punch out, match the waveform, lock it back in, and reconsolidate, and then redeliver. And it's very, very quick and very.
One thing, John, I was amazed at, and I thought it was an interesting idea that I wasn't as used to, is in your recorder, you running almost a traditional 7.1 setup. So you can already make the M&Es, you already can make the stereo versions, a 5.1 version. So it's not within the Atmos recorder yet. It's just within a recorder, and all the objects are going straight to the Atmos. setup. And then just the 7.1 single is going into the Atmos as almost more of a monitoring situation. So
That's
then,
right.
because there's
Yeah.
always the question of, a lot of people are creating multiple beds within the Atmos recorder. But then how do you take things out? How do you
Yeah.
make 5.1s? How do you make all these versions? And I thought it was great that you're building almost like a universal asset recorder that
Well,
could then be turned into anything at any time, offline.
the reason though, the actual absolute reason of doing that, we make 12 stems.
Yeah.
So it's basically 3 dialogue stems, which will be dialogue group and also my dialogue ADR separate, because sometimes when you're mixing down and near field, the reverb translates a little bit differently. You may want to change it or just lower it or whatever. So I like to keep that separate. And then 3 music stems, and then 6 all in effects stems. So background, Foley, hard effects design. But the reason we make those stems on an HDX6 system is just for near field purposes, to be able to mix the near field and hopefully not have to open a session back up, to get a good near field mix. And I know a lot of people do that differently, but we basically stick with a 712 and 114 or 118 objects on our renderer. So we have to end up having 2 recorders. And that's just because we have an HX6 and we can do 384 tracks of recording. But the old, on the Hitchcock, or the old Hitchcock, we actually had 3 recorders, an A recorder, a B recorder, and the C recorder. And we also run a re-render at the same time. So we get all of our re-renders from the objects that we make all at the same time. So it's,
Yeah, I was fascinated on because right now, everybody wants it yesterday, and
yeah,
and I mean, we're being called in to do a fix maybe this week, and I think it's interesting where they say, hey, we need a quick stereo, we need a 5.1. Usually be like, all right, that's going to take a little bit of time. No,
yeah.
boom, there it is, because it's not even in the Atmos recorder. It's just grabbing the 7.1s, folding them down, and then rendering out the objects into a 7.1, and then that could be turned into anything at any time as well.
Yeah, I mean, printing re-renders at the same time is where it's at. I mean, since you always have the re-renders in a 7.1 format, you can pretty much make anything anytime. And everybody wants something different, and for festivals, they don't deliver, there are no 7.1 deliverables, it's Atmos 5.1. And but yet festivals, people want 7.1s. So Bill's able to make anything very quickly. The problem is letting the client know that these are not QC'd. Please QC these. That's where the problem lies. Is like nobody really takes you seriously until it's too late. So you have to really press that issue, when you're doing that many bounces. Bouncing is our world these days. It is what it is. We all have to do it, but making sure that everybody understands that it is a bounce and there is a chance that something's going to go wrong, either something overloading, too much combining, or choking, or whatever. I mean, with the computers these days, it is, I can't. I've done lots of tests, and as much as I want to believe I can tell the difference, I can't anymore. So it's a whole new world, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Mandel, how are you dealing with and are you doing any of your shows on Atmos at this point, or just 7.1, or what?
Most of my shows are Atmos. When I'm working on them at home, I'm usually just cutting, and then we take it to a stage. And I work with different mixers, and they all have different templates, and so I'm juggling all of that.
And so here's a question, because that's a great transition. So I'm the same. I'm an independent. I work with everybody. Everybody has their way of working, and I always have to adapt. So are you built, which is a great, transition to templates, et cetera, et cetera. So are you, when you're prepping, are you sending them an Atmos session? Are you sending them beds and then dedicated tracks that are going to be objects to be placed by the mixer?
It is an Atmos session. Their templates are built for Atmos. We are thinking about Atmos while we're cutting, so we'll prepare tracks that are to be used for panning around and doing stuff. But I'm not monitoring them as Atmos here at home. I'm not set up for it.
So you're saying I'm going to
And-
dedicate a handful of tracks, and then
Yeah.
say these are going to be objects to be recommended. Hey, why don't you move it here, here, and
If
here?
we need them, like on winning time, we used we didn't put anything necessarily in the ceiling except for reverb. Some of the music went up there a little bit too, and that was mostly the source cues where we played with that. But having the surrounds, the full scale surround in Atmos really helped us with the crowds in all of the basketball scenes. So yeah, but working from home, I'm just cutting. I'm not terribly concerned how it's going to translate from here to there. Like I know it's going to translate to the stage because it has in the past, and I've been working off and on remotely for years. So even from my earlier days at Wildfire, where most of us were remote,
Hey,
this
Scott.
wasn't a big transition.
Scott, do you want to? Scott just joined us. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I apologize for being late. I'm Scott Kramer. I'm the manager for sound technology at Netflix.
And we were just talking about how we are dealing with templates of Atmos templates, and it's interesting because Pro Tools allows you to say, I'm going to take a track and I can put it wherever I want. And I've always said, because I go in with, I'm always known for going in with a lot of tracks and almost comically, but 1,000, 2,000 tracks, who cares? But really for me, it's about organization. I can destroy a mixer with 16 tracks. Because if things aren't predictable and they're all over the place, and because I've had the younger editors when I'm mixing, they'll give me stuff and they'll say it's left, it's right, it's ceiling, and they just start moving it all around, and you've got a handful of those tracks and you're like, I don't know how to anticipate anything, because now everything's just in the wild west. You got to look at every track as the ability, and if you start getting 32, 64, even 100 tracks, it can paralyze you. So so we're talking about, I'll just say for me, I like dedicated objects, maybe because I'm a little bit old school, but I like it because as I mix, but I work with a lot of mixers and I'm probably more sound design than mixing, but I know enough to be able to make my mixer's life easier, hopefully. Because I'm only as good as my mixer. I can do the best design on the planet, but if it doesn't translate on the stage and the director's there, then I suck. Then you just it's for all. So it's a very critical point. So the whole point in my philosophy is the more I make it predictable, the more I make it understandable that the mixers, and the reason I do a lot of tracks, by the way, I do categories. So for instance, like we were talking about Pinocchio, Pinocchio's footsteps, boom, there it is. Volpe sounds, all these different characters had it. Same thing we did with the dialogue. Everybody, because it's animation, we could do this. Each dialogue person was on their own track and their efforts were on separate tracks. So we were anticipating dealing with M&Es and efforts, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole point of the more that we could make it intuitive, yes, the mixer's got to go through row one, and row one sucks. The first set of days. And then after that, they start getting muscle memory and they know exactly where that stuff is in theory. What are your thoughts? How do you guys do your setups? What are your philosophies? Lyle, you're doing both, especially when you're not doing both. When you're doing both, you can do it the way you like it, but when you're working with someone else.
For me, and I was just thinking about the whole thing with the 7-1 beds plus the fun stuff. A lot of it, especially in television, there's a time element to all of this, because say when we did Flight Attendant, we have 4 days to do it. So that gives, I'm working here pre-dubbing in my studio. Matt Bowles is pre-dubbing in his studio. So like the first day, we just try to make a run through the show. And then I bounce out a 7-1 stem for him to work against. He does the same, sends me the dialogue and music. to work against. And so we got 2 days to go through all this material and pre-dub it and get it going. Because in the second 2 days, it's basically all clients, you know, we do playbacks, do notes, multiple playbacks, multiple rounds of notes. So one of the ways that I've been getting able to put a lot of get stuff up top is I use a send, just like it's a reverb send. I have a send to the top bus, you know, and so you're going along in the show and then it gets to one of those sequences where there's all this design and stuff. So I can go to my design group and just send every track a little bit up to the top, like saying like a 712 versus 714. It's just when that fast, you know, big thing happens, all these little noises, there's not really time to like do a meaningful pan on a quick flash or something because it's just too quick. But I'm just opening the room up for when those flashes and those hits happen, like all of a sudden the top opens up around you. So you have your normal world here that you're, you know, walking through the airport or whatever. And then boom, she goes into something and then everything starts to light up top. And I'm doing it just using a send instead of copying a bunch of tracks that were delivered from the editor and deciding, okay, I'm going to move that up to object. I'm going to move that up to object. I just say, I'm going to take that whole design piece and open up a send just like a reverb and just send it up there. So
let me ask you this, Lyle. And I know that when we were working with Frankie and just other shows, do you do 100% ceiling or do you do ceiling lowered down a little in the surround so it's never 100% dedicated in case it doesn't work out or doesn't translate or something? Do you do a combination of surrounds and a little ceiling?
That's another reason that to use the send, because I'm still getting it coming out in my normal speakers, and then I'm adding to it. So if something's getting lost in the translation, I haven't put that really cool sound way up top and then no one's ever going to hear it now. I always keep a little bit everywhere just because I think it's going to translate better, you know, across the show.
It's funny to say that. And I know for me, I have my own little words. I break objects into two groups, stagnant and dynamic, because sort of stagnant to me is set and forget. I want to put it there. It's going to live there. And you don't have to, you can just sort of set it, or I have dedicated tracks that are just going to live there. And that's all, it's kind of pre-set. And then obviously the dynamics of those things that need to be panned because they're going to be moving. So backgrounds, a lot of times, I don't want them to move around. I don't want your ears following. A lot of times I want to just have things stay, or a non-theatrical, I was thinking more theatrical, but putting different backgrounds, like halfway front, like when doing Pacific Rim, I had different echoes and different reverbs in thirds of the rooms. So they were different reverbs as you went. So it wasn't just like one giant flat beat. It has more dynamics based on where you are in the room.
Well, when you got plenty of time to sit on the stage and do all of those things, that's super cool. When you have 2 days to put the show together, from the editor handing me the tracks to I'm on the stage with the suits giving notes, you got to move fast, you know, and a, you know, 40-50 minute show. It's a lot to get through in a day.
Absolutely. And I think that, I think the TV, I'm seeing some of these guys are mixing a show in 2 days, 3 days tops. And so it's a little apples and oranges. That's why I think streaming is sort of in the middle. You may not have as much time as a feature film, but you get more. It's, you know, and it depends obviously on the director, on the show, on how far that's going to go. With Scott Kramer, and then we're going to go into some more creative stuff as well. So Scott, you know, we were talking in our first two panels on non-theatrical Atmos, you know, music-wise, what is Atmos? Meaning, like a lot of the music guys do not use the center. They still is a little weird for them. And then how much they, you know, they use ceiling and surrounds and all of that. The big question I've got, you know, is there's so many different non-theatrical formats in conceptually, you know, again, with 926, 714, 712, what have you been finding, or what has there been any research that Netflix has done that based on the listeners, we're finding most people are using 512, 712, 714. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. There's no experience like sitting in a theater with a group of people enjoying a film. And this is fantastic. In reality, hundreds of millions of people are watching our work on TVs. And if I look at the data for Netflix, and we're very open about that, the Atmos is around 2% of consumption. It's growing. It's the only stream that's growing in consumption, while the others are slowly receding. And Atmos is immersive audio writ large will be with us. This is the next format for the next 4 decades, or so. But we don't have home theaters. We have about 1% of home theaters. We have about
So home theaters, you think sound bars and stuff, right?
No, home theaters. And then
okay.
we have about 40 million to 50 million sound bars globally shipped. So we see enough consumption in other countries to justify dubbing in Atmos. And we need to, Netflix is going to ramp up dubbing in Atmos. And some of the others are already doing it at a large scale. So, it's not going away. It's growing all the time. I'm the most excited about ways to take the immersive mix and make stereo better, because that's the way we address the majority. And that majority is not changing. The 70% or so of people watching in stereo, that's not moving, because the consumer's decision path on purchasing audio equipment is not like ours. Your average friend on the other side of the world is not making decisions the way we do. And so it's hard for us as sound artists to wrap our heads around how the general public thinks about these things. But they're hearing stereo. So we got to make stereo as good as we can. And Netflix can play a role in establishing better standards for consumer equipment manufacturers, so that we don't have a lowest common denominator of a television being 99% devoted to picture, and the speakers in the TV are so substandard. They really compromise our work when it's heard on a TV. But we can do things. And so I'm the most excited about spatial audio. I'm really, really excited about that. You're going to see a lot of movement in that space, and it's the Wild West right now, and we don't always like what we hear, but it's getting better all the time. So I'm excited about watching that part of the market shake out. That way, all the work we do in the theater, in the pristine environment, is going to get closer to the people. And for a sound designer, I just want to say before we move on, I really can recommend that sound designers and editors get, Resolve Studio for $200 with the built-in renderer, or Nuendo for a little more. It's on sale right now. Or Pro Tools or Dolby Atmos Production Suite, and learn immersive audio, because the only way you really learn is by doing it and know Atmos, and it'll inform your work with mixers, or you might mix a short yourself. Just do it. It won't be mysterious for very long. And the biggest thing about immersive audio is it's a branding trick. Filmmaking hasn't changed. How we tell a story with sound hasn't changed. The panner just goes up. And so we're trying to calm people down at Netflix and say, the art of this is what we should be focused on, how to tell the story, and how to take what's in our heads when we're dreaming and put that out of the speakers. And that's the fun part, not the tools. They're just tools.
Sure. It's interesting. Right before I started doing much more streaming, and I had a stint at Technicolor where I was kind of in charge of VR. And so I started dealing with a lot of spatial audio out of headphones, and dealing with different HRTF issues and binaural issues. And I think that what's interesting is I got asked to do a Atmos mix for a phone. And first I thought from China, and I thought like, oh no, you must be using the words wrong. That doesn't make any sense because I didn't know. And then I realized what they're doing is they're going to the ADM files and creating a moving multi-channel binaural experience. And I thought that that was fascinating on how that's evolving. Because like Jamie and I were talking, we all came from gaming as well. So concept of objects is not new. And moving things around. If anything, you're dealing with thousands of objects because every sound is actually an object with some form of information tied to it.
Didn't I mix that thing? Was that thing that I?
Oh no, no, that was something different.
Because I
But
remember we were really searching for how are we going to do this mix, and we figured out that we could do it to a binaural MP4 right from the.
It is, and I think it's
Sure.
fascinating on, because then you're hearing about Sony's doing technology that reproduces the stages on headphones. So now all of a sudden, so there's all this interesting technology that I know I've spoken with Jeff about and other people that I've seen where now you put headphones on and now you could be in whatever dubbing stage that and it translates at least everything but the sub. But it is interesting how I think the technology is really translating to these fascinating areas because I know my son, my wife and I, we have our home theater and we sit in our couches and we lean back because this is what we do. And my son's got his iPad and his headphones. And that's how he adjusts. He goes outside, he's upside down, he's on the stairs, he's wherever he wants to be. And that's how he receives his entertainment. So it's fascinating how that, we're going to do a whole seminar. I don't want to drift too far off of this because that's one of the next classes I want to do is on immersive audio, not necessarily Atmos, but now dealing with all the new formats that are coming out from Dolby, Apple, and on and on and on. We can do its own thing. So you're finding, Scott, that a majority, actually, let me ask this. Have you found a lot of people listening to Netflix on headphones?
No, the behavior, here's what's so traditional about what we're doing and what everyone else is doing. The experience of sitting in a living room with your family watching TV hasn't changed. And it's TV. And the size of the living room varies around the world. But that's that. And also there are mobile first countries. So there are countries that are primarily mobile. But by and large, we're talking about people in the living room with the TV, and they're using the built-in speakers on their device. Not a lot of headphone behavior going on. Headphones are more visible because you'll be in public and you'll see people with headphones on. You'll be on the subway and people will have headphones on. But you don't generally, a consumer doesn't put in headphones unless they need to. Music is a bit of an exception to that. But the consumption is built-in speakers. So Apple's been doing spatial audio on all the devices without telling us for years, and they make your laptop sound a little bit better. There's always been DSP to protect the built-in speaker on your phone from distorting. That's the most basic speaker protection, DSP. And now there's a kit of DSP that comes with codecs and just comes on the device and the OS with all kinds of processing and optimizations that are happening. And that can be, it's any other tool. It can be a concern to us, or it can be really helpful to make those speakers do more than they could do without that DSP. So that's when I think spatial audio, I'm not thinking about headphones as much and binaural and people putting on a dub stage on their head and mixing, although that's super cool. And so with Sony VME, which hopefully will be able to be in the marketplace and be productized so any of us can use it. And then with like the Smith Realizer and things like that, it's great for artists and pros like us. For the general public, we can make the speakers in the device sound a little better. We can make sounds seem to come from around the device. And so all that surround work that we do with overhead content and just traditional surround content, that can make its way more to stereo. And that makes us feel like it's more worth it. It's more worth putting the effort in when we're doing these big immersive mixes, and it's going to make its way to the home. The technology is always evolving. The codecs are imperfect right now. Dolby Atmos doesn't sound perceptually transparent today. It's good. It's not good enough, and it's going to get better. AC4 is the next step. MPEG-H from Fraunhofer is the next step in a true object-based immersive mix going into a home or a phone. And then the device does the render, and the device makes the decisions on how to position. That's great. I mean, that's what we've already seen in Dolby Vision, is protecting an HDR10 is protecting that version from the studio all the way into the home, so that it's translating in a way that makes sense on that device.
Yeah, one of the things we were talking about, Scott, before you came on, was especially because of COVID, so much, especially the editing side. Mixing is a bag of nuts, but editorial, it seems like most people are still working at home and actually prefer working at home, which also, you know, the post facilities then don't have to start building massive facilities. So it's kind of a win-win issue on that front. So that's why one of the things we're talking about, even on this, is as we are from the editorial standpoint, how people are dealing with Atmos, because the reality is it is a delivery format that we have to be able to create. So how are people, some people are building significant, basically dubbing stages at their houses, sort of what John's done. Some people are building mobile rigs like Lyle's been doing, because he keeps going from room to room, and everybody's sort of in between, in the middle of how do they, how are we dealing with this, this new dynamic within the Atmos, the non-theatrical Atmos format.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Sorry, in the pandemic, I built a studio with some cheap JBLs for overheads and had a 714 in a bedroom. And it worked fine. You know, I used to mix M&Es on a laptop, and I was rendering Atmos, making Atmos masters on a laptop 5 years ago, you know, so just do what you can with what you have is my advice. And I also remember at Wildfire with Dell, we had to just make things just had to play. It was more the Lyle and Jamie and Dell, and you know, a lot of us were in that back 10 years ago or 15 years ago. It had to just play. You didn't have time to mess with it on the stage. So the sound designer was also a mixer, you know.
Exactly, and that's why I think on this group, I wanted to hand select, and also spoke. Craig Hannigan was going to jump on, but unfortunately he's got a mix. But we spent yesterday really in depthly talking about some of his ideas, which I'll bring up a little bit later. But it is, I think that there is now a, it's been going on for a while. I mean, Skywalker kind of created it originally, but between editorial and mixers in Hollywood, there was a hard divide, and now that's starting to blur. And I think it's blurred for different reasons. Some people want to creatively be able to go from soup to nuts. Other people, it's just about time. The mixers don't have as much time, so they now have to rely on the editorial groups to get their tracks further along, because they don't have as much pre-dub time, even films or TV time. If you're doing mixes in 2 or 3 days, I was talking, you know, to Sherry Klein, and I know she's listening now, but we talk about, you know, what do her dialogue people do? How much do they prep it? Because a lot of times, if you're going and you're doing 45 minutes in 2 or 3 days, there's only so much you can do. So, and I also think that the listening environments for the editorial teams are getting better on certain issues. But, you know, but I think it's really been called out during COVID, because now you had to work at home and people were working in areas that, you know, I'm working in my den and it's really reverberant and it's horrible. And then people start building studios, et cetera, et cetera. We get to some more creative stuff. So, you know, and I had this thought, and so we know that, I'll use it since you're here, Scott. Netflix is metering off of the center channel minus 27 within the dialogue frequencies, if I'm correct. Is that okay? So something you can do in non-theatrical, which you can't do in theatrical, and that is on non-theatrical, you have a phantom center that you can actually use. The music guys don't like to use the center. They like to kind of create a phantom center. So if there's ways that you wanted to create sounds that weren't going to hit the minus 27 meter, anybody playing around with, not even just because of metering, but just creatively, Anybody playing around with going more with phantom center than direct center? Especially because if it's coming off a TV, it won't be much different. Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, because you can cheat. Or, just lots of channels all of a sudden, sharing stuff around to different speakers or whatever. The meter says one thing and the speakers say another.
Because I know that in the music guys, I mean, so many times at post, it's either like phantom center or stereo. And the music guys who have only had stereo really play the degrees of stereo a lot. Anybody playing around with that? Jamie, Mandel, Wendell, anyone,
No,
Um,
I'm still doing like, a mix and then dealing with the down mixes from there, and I don't deal with Phantom Center at all until I'm hearing the results. In terms of hitting a spec, I'm just doing the old school mixing thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
I'm
but
not
I think
chasing
it's
a
really
spec till we're mixing.
What's that?
I'm not chasing a spec until we're on the mix stage.
Right.
And even then, it's if we put it into all the speakers to give us perceived loudness, then that's just for a specific point in the storytelling.
Yeah.
It's-
For me as a designer, when I started transitioning from theatrical to streaming, I wanted to recalibrate my ears because I know I can rock a room and I know how to play within the theatrical realm. And I was fascinated to rethink my approach on design of how things are going to punch. So for me, it's like I hear records and music that have good kick drums. There's no sub, how snares are going, how a compression's going, choices of masking issues of from a design standpoint. So, then you start thinking of Pultex, how they play with main speakers better. Things that I think I spend more time thinking, how do I get my old record tricks to play better in a near field environment more than I think I ever did on theatrical, because theatrical, while we always did that, you could rock a room. I mean, you got the LFE. While you don't want to rely on it, it was easier to get where you wanted to go quicker than really being picky about how, what elements are going to play and how punchy and how we're dipping certain mid-range frequencies. Again, similar to what we all did in music. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
It's interesting because we talked about that, Scott, a little bit,
I know.
and I started in the music world, and it's always about, of course, getting that right tone. And when you get that right tone, it just travels. And same with theatrical. Yeah, we've got so much more room for sure. There's no doubt about it. But it does start there. We talked about going from theatrical to near field and having that translation. And it does start with making sure, things are contained, and it starts in the recording. And Pinocchio had just Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio had such a beautiful low end. And that's because, it's in the recording. The recording was correct. The mixing that Steve and Kirsty did was what was their names? Gosh dang it, the London mixers. They're so good. They did such a great job
Right.
mixing the music down.
Yeah.
Peter and Kirsty. And they did such a
And
great
Carlos
job.
and those guys, yeah.
You're absolutely right, though. I mean, that's where it starts, and when it's done right from the beginning of the inception, it does carry its way through. So sometimes, because generally when I get music, like for Fast and Furious, every single song is splits. I may have, 150, 160 tracks, and but it's still compressed. It still comes in sometimes too compressed. I have to take it, ask them to take some of the compression off and reprints and redeliver. But getting that sound right when it's in theatrical, correct, it works its way down, and I don't have to worry about it. And I definitely don't worry about phantom center. I use real center and deal exactly like Jamie said earlier, and deal with the consequences as it goes down.
But I think it's an interesting tool that that you could look at, especially if you're in a smaller room and you're mixing, because you're in a bigger room, it's really hard to hear. Phantom center just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But when you're in a smaller room and all of a sudden you're not sure if it's center or phantom center, and it's not just a metering volume issue at all, but it's more about, like a lot of times I'm doing big creatures, big sounds, and sometimes I want to give it a certain strength.
Mhm.
Theatrical, I might go center heavy with a little left and right to give it width.
Mhm.
What I might then do in if I'm doing a big creature or a big explosion or something, now I'm thinking, all right, the center is going to play a role, but it's not the same way that is theatrically. So now listening to left and right, I may have some elements off the center. I have some that are phantom center and some that are hard left and right with a little surround. So playing all of the spatial tricks and advantages that I think non-theatrical has that theatrical doesn't.
But
So it's
that's
not,
that's a really good question. Dealing with that is in the past, and I don't worry about it anymore, but it used to be you always had to worry about mono, and you had to worry about mono TV, because when you're talking about stereo with 2-track, you're dealing with phase relationship and things that will end up flying around your head depending on how much out of phase you are. But in the past, it would be you had to worry about people losing any out of phase information on a mono speaker. I definitely haven't worried about that in probably 12 or 15 years. I don't know about anybody else if they're running that issue, or if Netflix does mono checks anymore, or how people deal.
yeah.
It used to be, John, that you only had mono and you didn't have a lot of dynamic range, and so it had to be carving up the mix frequency wise. And then we entered the stereo era. There's a little more room to play. Digital era, the dynamic range came back. Now it's such a palette. How do you stay disciplined? How do you stay disciplined when
Yeah.
you're designing a soundtrack? Because you've got these 3 different axes that you can work on: frequency, dynamic range, and space. And how do you keep in the right mindset?
Right.
And
Right.
I'll even
And
say that, go ahead, John.
no, I say really that is the question. It's disciplined, and staying disciplined so you can translate all the way down, because it's tough. A lot of the times I think about the guys, the 1% or 2% that you were talking about that actually do have Atmos theaters at their home. And when it was DVD world, I wanted to mix as dynamic as possible. For the 7.1 that was going to be on a DVD, and then the 5.1 I would actually take some dynamics out, because that was going to be for more of the people in more different space. And then the 2-track, of course, is really compressed. And in streaming, it's a little bit different, because I find that the Atmos and the 5.1 end up being pretty much very, very, very similar, other than the overheads and the split surrounds. But the 2-track still spent a lot of time on that, because when they author the 2-track and they play the 2-track, I'm always thinking about people in bed with their wives next to them and being able to hear everything. So I love mixing, or at least monitoring the 2-track on a TV at a very low level, just to make sure that everything, whatever you can get through, plays. But the mono thing used to be a real concern of mine, because of getting hit a couple times of, I lost that dialogue. And it's like, you lost the dialogue because it's in the surrounds. Okay, can't do that anymore. But now I really don't worry about it so much. But I do find myself in stereo on the TV. I do dialogue that's in back only, I do pan forward. Not, you know what I mean? Just to make sure. So for 5.1.
You brought up something good, John, that I wanted to transition to. I know we got to get to questions pretty soon. So real quick, I want to go down the group. Listening levels, not as mixing. I understand the mixing side, but let's talk about design. When you're designing the sound, because like some people like to feel it, some people don't like to feel it. What are your thoughts? So let's go, Mandel. What when you're editing, what volume are you listening to at?
I'm usually around 82. Sometimes I'll play with it depending on where I'm feeling at that day. I mean, sometimes I perceive things louder sometimes than they really are. So I'm all over the place, but I come back to 82.
Lyle, when you're designing?
Well, whenever I'm designing these days, it's something that I'm mixing, so it's the same thing. But my room's at 80 all the time. I like to give my ears a break. I got a small room, so I'm right on the speakers. I don't have a screen. And I always feel like when I hit the stage, I would rather be designing or mixing a little hotter because I'm monitoring lower. So when you turn it up, you're going to have all that. If you're at 85 designing and then you turn it down to 83, your stuff might seem a little anemic compared to where you wanted it to be. Then you have to readjust. So I like to mix lower so that everything's got more muscle behind it, because of the lower monitoring.
Right. Jamie?
81.
Jeff? Oh, sorry, finish? Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, at some point, stuff starts to hurt my ears, and then I know it's too loud. So then, but if I just keep it straight at 81, I know the translation is gonna be perfect.
Jeff?
Yeah, around 80 typically at home or in a small, in a cutting room or whatever. I hang out around 80.
I have I'll say for my setup, I've got a BSS system and I actually have presets, volume presets. So yeah, I very rarely do 85. Though interesting, when we were doing Pinocchio, John, I think I did 82. And then when I brought it to the stage, it was too loud.
Mm-hmm.
So then I actually, when I did after that one little test, I actually listened to 85 and it really zeroed in exactly where we wanted it. But I usually do for action, because I get all excited about it. I go 82, but I also have 80 and 78. So a lot of times I'm making sure that I jump to 78 and even 76 to make sure my explosions and those really, because it sounds great. It's easy to make things sound big, especially in small rooms. The room vibrates, you get all this low end buildup, and then you hear it in a different kind of room and you go, what happened? So sometimes by listening lower, and also I'm kind of freakish because I've got 2 sets of LCRs and 2 sets of stereos that I'm constantly, and I just from a switch, I can switch around and my barefoots have 4 different modes on the barefoots themselves. So it gives me the ability, maybe it's my old music side where I wanted to hear it on different speakers. I can jump to that. Jeff, I already asked you, didn't you? Said 80, right? Scott, when you edit and do all your stuff, anything on your side?
But I was always in small rooms back in the day, so it'd be small. I will say that we listen to a lot of near field mixes in different rooms at Netflix. Now, the last 2 years, a lot more theaters and rooms have come online. I've found we're playing back near field mixes in rooms that are the size of a cutting room all the way up to a 400-seat theater. And it all depends on the room volume and how much air mass is in the room. And that's even written into the standards documents. So there's a lot more flexibility with that than some people think. And I'm playing near field mixes that passed our spec at 70, 74 in some rooms and pushing them all the way to 85, depending on the size of the room volume, how much air mass is taking that power out.
You have a fascinating bird's eye viewpoint, because you can hear everybody's work and see how everybody is handling, contrast, and like, oh, that place is a little punchy, that's warmer, that's, just hearing everybody's approach.
Yeah. It's beautiful because everything lands where it's meant to be. Everything ends up filling the market, filling the piece of art that it is. It always ends up, if a showrunner and a director are happy, then we're happy. And
Sure.
we might secretly have our ideas, but we're not important. We're not important. The important one is the client, and they're our client too, because they can fire us just as much as they can fire you guys. So we got to keep the clients happy, and it always works itself out. Whether it's a multi-million, $100 million film, or whether it's an indie film or a low budget co-produced series or animation, it always just seems the sound generally seems to fit what it's meant to do. and we don't pass judgment on any of that.
Of course.
We just like to see people try and grow, and especially push harder on the Atmos version and make sure their translation for dialogue works really well. Because we do see that if people can't follow the story, they're going to turn it off. So that's like the core.
Speaking just from an art form, I watch a lot of TV. Probably hate to say 4 to 6 hours a day, maybe, as that, and at the end, I just my way of relaxing. It depends if I'm at a mixing stage, like we just got to finish mixing. I don't want to hear anything. I want as much silence as I can get. But sometimes I jump in because I do enjoy watching shows, and occasionally I'll hear, similar to records, I'll hear somebody will do something, my ears will perk up and go, ooh, I like how they approached, just the sounds a more punchier, a little brighter, a little more articulate, a little more whatever, and a lot of it, I know in sound design now, part of the holy grail, we know the pitching, we know the delays. We're going to talk about reverbs in 1 second, but a lot of it is saturation. Sometimes it started with the L1 once upon a time to the L3s, and now people are using subtle saturators, tape saturators, things that give a little grit, little bite, to give that extra little. That's what I'm saying. Like I think it's more near field. It really stands out way more in some ways than film. Because now, you have a big screen, you got horn speakers that have a 3K bump, all these different things that are so theatrical. Now we're non-theatrical. We're almost with music, if not dead on with music. So now all of a sudden, what subtle tricks are we now as people, as sound creators, sound designers, and before we get to the mix stage as well as the mix stage. But now often these little things we can do to give it an extra little something that maintains to sound good on an iPad, which I like to do, by the way. I think my mixes, pop it through an iPad and just see, does it all fall apart?
Yeah, the audience can hear everything that we're doing, and it's getting more hi-fi every day. But it's the same old challenge for sound designers. It's like, how do I surprise myself, and how do I surprise the audience? How do I design the sound next door to the sound? Not the obvious sound. How do I avoid the temptation of paint by numbers? How do I get myself there creatively and artistically? And that's never changed. And I just have so much admiration for people who have that level of inspiration.
Let me ask this, and then we got to get to questions. But this is really, really great. So reverbs. Okay. There's a lot of Atmos reverbs. There's a lot of 7.1 reverbs. And then there's the concept of using multiple stereo reverbs in a Atmos environment. Thoughts? Anybody want to jump in?
All of the above.
Yeah.
Whatever
All
my
of the
mixer
above.
wants.
So, Amanda, with that said, when you're doing design or anything, do you put reverbs in, or do you prefer the mixer says, I prefer you don't do that?
Oh, we do some. My team does some, but a lot of that is tailored by the mixer, and we can design something in a way that we want it presented, but it's all automated, so they can change it if they don't like it. So
Right. Jamie?
For me, there's this, there's this divide between if I'm mixing and if somebody else is mixing. If I'm mixing, yeah, I'm going to do lots of bus reverbs. I'm going to have my, heights as objects, and I usually use the exponential verbs. But I am actually transitioning my template to use the
Cinema
HE
rooms.
part verbs and cinematic rooms. I love those verbs, and they really sound great. But in terms of if I'm mixing myself, yeah, I'm going to use a lot of bus reverbs. I'm going to sort
But
of
when you're designing, let's just say,
Mhm. When I'm designing, I don't. I typically embed if I want something to have a really long tail or something lush that's really designy. I'm going to embed that into like a secondary sound that plays. And if the mixer wants to limit that and use his own verbs, it's an option. But I'm just sort of making suggestions. Right now, I'm working with Juan Peralta, and I'm not presuming anything to his taste. I'm just sort of keeping everything dry and clean, and
Yeah.
I'll make suggestions. And that goes with Atmos objects as well. It's like I'm not gonna tell him, hey, I want this to be in Atmos, but it'll be obvious, you know. And sure enough, you know, when I pull back his sessions, it's like, yeah, he knew exactly what I was thinking in that regard. So.
Jeff?
Yes. Well, it's definitely, I mean, if I'm going to mix something, then I'll just, you know, I just bake it all in right from the beginning. But I have like a similar, what he was just describing. You know, we'll give like maybe two stems of something or whatever. If I think it needs some big old long thing or whatever added to it, I'll have the sound dry and then a wet, you know, thing that goes with it, as a, you know, suggestion or whatever. I find on the features that I like, if I'm supervising it, we end up doing a lot of temp mixing or a lot of demo mixing to present stuff. So we're sort of baking all of that in. And then when we get ready to pre-dub, if I'm not mixing it, it's like, well, do you want me to leave it in or take it out? You know, or I just, and a lot of times it's like, leave it. Oh, well, you know, I can always ditch it, you know, whatever. And because some of it, I don't know, I don't like to lean on that so much as just like have the right sound. And if it's the right sound, it'll be the right sound, dry or not, you know?
Yep.
And so the reverb is more like, you know, frosting or whatever. And all of that is so situational. I mean, once you've got music and everything else going, it's like, you know, all bets are off. So it's like to presume that, you know, we're going to sort of know in advance how that's going to play is, I think, hubris at best. But you know, so, and I think something I was going to say is with sound for film, television, whatever, so different than music. You know, we always have that dialogue track that's always going to win. You know, I say that, so, you know, joke with the crew. It's like, why are you turning the dialogue off?
Right.
You know, like just leave it on. You know, if you can't hear the dialogue, then start over. You know, it's like just leave the dialogue guide on. And it reminded me of a long time ago at like an AES thing. I got to hear Bob Clearmountain talking, and he was just talking about how I don't understand soloing the kick. You know, he was just like, and you should like just mix the vocal first and leave that in solo isolate. So it's, you know, no matter what you're soloing, you're still hearing the vocal, you know. It's like, I firmly believe in that because it's like, that's where the story is most of the time. You know, every once in a while there's story in the sound effects, but you know, it's you know, it's the story is that human or that thing, whether it's a monster or a alien or a human speaking or communicating, however it communicates, that's the story. So
I 100% agree with you. And I think that,
and I
you
think
know,
we're lucky in that regard because you don't have to like, we don't necessarily have to write the story. You know, it's like we're responding to a story that existed as words on a page. And I always like, that's, I think it's fun to read the script, you know, like what did somebody intended something, somebody had a vision that they were able to get this, some people to spend a bunch of money to make by just putting some words on paper. So start there.
and I think that, you know, I 100% agree with you where I think dialogue, because some people have a bite to them where no matter who the dialogue is, you can hear it easily. And other people are either hoarse or mellow to a point where they just, you got to reach for it a little bit and the dialogue mix is going to work it. But I think, you know, when I used to do music, people would go, oh my God, you mixed so well. And I'd go, thank you, but it was the arrangement. Because if it's arranged properly and thought out beforehand, it sort of plays on its own really nicely because somebody gave thought of masking issues and conflict issues. And that's what a great orchestration does. For me, when I look at reverbs, I'm never really thinking reverb. Well, on the design phase, I know on the mix side, the mixers will add reverb to taste based on the ambience, based on where the dialogue is, and are we in a big room, a small room, et cetera, et cetera. However, from a design standpoint, I do like to have reverb to help an explosion sound bigger, a creature to sound more resonating. I also I do a lot of multi-channel, though I do agree I use all the above, the stereos. So like on Pacific Rim, I used 3 reverbs, front, mid, and rear, because I wanted it to travel always behind me. I like that effect where something roars and it decays behind you, giving it and it also creates sustain. It's, so we were talking about spatial, there's also a time issue that if you can do certain tricks, you can elongate a sound to make it cut through a mix without bringing the volume up. Sometimes you can even bring it down because it sustains through the room a little bit longer, or taking it off into the surrounds a little bit, just a tickle. So it separates from the TV or the screen just enough to be present or not, because you got dialogue and you go, you know what? I want to put a multi-band compressor on it. I want to kick it out because I want to protect the dialogue at that time. So in some ways, infusing reverbs or resonators as an effect, not as a spatial discussion, sometimes is very compelling. Anybody have any more thoughts I want to throw in there?
I usually use stereo reverbs more than 5.1 or 7.1 because I find that I don't want the reverb lighting up all the speakers all the time. I want to position my reverb around the other things I have going. One thing that bugs me when people have their, like on Foley, and they have really wide reverbs going, and I'm hearing the footsteps coming out of the left and right. This doesn't seem right to me. So my Foley reverb is always tucked in more towards the center so that it's coming from that step. Or say there's a dog barking and it's over here on the left. And if you put an outside slap and it slaps too far, you're losing the directionality of that dog is over there. So I take the stereo and put the slap, not completely over there, but just it's more for the directionality for me.
Yeah.
And I use the stereo more. And then here, a little trick though, Jeff Roubaix actually taught me is just what you were talking about there, Scott. When you want like the thing traveling behind you, I still have that in my mix template now. It's a thing called spreader, where he showed me to do a send that was put to a delay in the back, and one was set to like 25 milliseconds and one's to 35 milliseconds. So when you wanted to give a little extra oomph to something, you just crank that send of the spreader, and like the explosion, it would wrap around you. Still have that mix template today, Jeff.
One more thing, and I know we're getting pressured to go into questions because I know we're way over. But one last thing is, one thing I did notice is with like a reverb called indoors, or some of these really tight. When you're in a big theatrical, you're in a big room trying to make a small sound, which is always challenging because it's a little odd. Most people just stick it to the screen, so it feels like it's in front. But now with non-theatrical, you can actually hear a small room because you're in a small room, and it's easy to go to a bigger room. So now it's an interesting way, even with dialogue or other things, that you're able to simulate a smaller room much more effectively in non-theatrical than theatrical. Thoughts?
It's
Okay,
definitely
thank you.
back to no. Let's on Pinocchio, actually, when Geppetto sticks his head, in the where he had to put Pinocchio, right? When he has the little mitt hanging on his nose.
Yeah.
That was a very small room space that I really wanted to hear that small room sort of slap as Geppetto's looking at us. I wanted to feel that we were in this little tiny cubicle, and to get that to play in the theater was impossible. It just couldn't work, because trying to get it at that point, you basically sounded like Geppetto was just, his voice was everywhere. So I just never really got it. But in here, when I came to the smaller, venue, it was like, there it is. That sounds great. That's awesome. So there are some things that are just impossible to do, unless you really, really make it stand out. And in that case, it's like, no. It's not helping the story. It's just an effect.
One thing I'll say that I like about non-theatrical, maybe because it's from the music side, and I realize that, we all have special gear that's expensive and the consumers don't have it per se.
Yeah.
Some do. You're able to hear spatialness in some ways better, articulation between speakers a little bit better, because they're point source. They're not in a room that's diffusing sound and it's smearing it all around. Now, all of a sudden, if something's to the side or the rear, your ears go right to it because it's point source. And you can actually hear the difference between stereo reverbs, because now you've got a spatialness to them that if you have a sound system, you can hear that detail more than you may hear in a theater, especially if you're not in the pristine seats.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let me get to some questions. So they're giving me the countdown. Okay, we'll go quick. Okay, John, this is for you. What are you using to emulate other speakers? When I made the comment that you can hear it.
You know what? It's actually because the Dolby guys go and they tune so many different speakers. And so I asked Potvin at Dolby if he could give me a 708 setup, which is basically for when I'm doing near fields and I'm flat on top. The 708s have a little bit of a bump at 100 hertz. And because I monitor at 79 when I'm doing near fields, I monitor a much lower level, as Scott knows. So I make sure I hear everything. But it's and then I put my 6328 also up just to listen to the difference. And it's shocking. It works very, very, very well. And it translates amazingly. So I listen to the whole thing in theatrical curve first. And then I say, okay, well, that's definitely what I'm used to. Then I switch over to the 708s and see how much I have to tweak if the low end builds up, because that's generally what happens. But yeah, mostly it's equalization.
Richard Cheeky. Hey, Richard. He was from our first panel. He's asking, what ceiling heights do you all have in your home rooms?
I'm 10 and a half feet.
It's like 9 feet.
9 feet.
Yeah, 9 feet.
Yeah, I'm probably 8, 9 feet. So the question is, do you then add delays to your ceilings to get them a little bit further away to give it more a spatialness? Or not?
I have about 8 feet, I think maybe a little over 8 feet. But I found, like, when I did my first theatrical mix, it was at the Technicolor stage at Paramount. And the ceiling there was so high that everything that I had in my heights just disappeared. It was like it wasn't even there. And I don't know if maybe they had it calibrated too low or something like that, but I had to really, like, if I wanted some, like, airplanes flying overhead and stuff like that, if I wanted to hear it, I had to really push it. And then, of course, that made the stereo mix down. It made it too loud in that. So, it was a kind of a weird thing that I just kind of had to realize that in a big room like that, the height stuff doesn't really matter.
Right.
Sadly.
So I will say, though, that a lot of times editing rooms, you don't want to be in the 50-50 part of your room because for build up and all sorts of acoustic issues. So you tend to lean a little more towards the front. What I have noticed, though, is when you drive your surrounds a little louder to make it at level where you are, some speakers sound a little different when they give them more volume. They blur a little bit. I noticed that actually with 708s. That I have 708s probably 20 feet behind me that need to come to me in compared to the 6 foot away from the fronts or less. And all of a sudden I can hear them kind of, they just have a slightly different tone. So there's it is what it is. Next question. Oh, Thoughts?
I have delays on I have everything's delay controlled for the mixer position. So the whole room, everything comes to me exactly the same time.
John, with that, do you delay it a little more to make it sound more like Hitchcock? Or do you keep it tight to where you are?
No, no, I mean, every room, including theaters, are delayed to a central point. So every theater is going to have, a different type of delay or plus, just to make it a little bit different or a little bit wider.
But you're in a
So
bigger room, so the room's going to have a delay to itself.
exactly,
So-
yeah. So you have to
so do you-
compensate. All that has to be compensated for. And for me, it's just timing. So everything goes to me at the same time here. And my ceilings are 16 feet, but there's no reason to have that much difference between the back and front, because every speaker in here basically is 6.5 feet apart. From the left, from the center to the left, to the right, to the sides, to everything 6.5 feet. So it just makes sense that it's at 10.5 feet. But
Right.
just because I have the room doesn't mean you need to use it. Like the technical, or like you're saying.
Yeah. So I've got some more questions. I'm going to try to get through them. This is John. Okay, I'm going to read it. Hi, John. We have a 714 system Nuendo. When we create an ADM and then we import to a new project for quality control, Nuendo creates a 712 bus and routes all the objects to the 712 bus. The bed is routed to no bus, but we still hear it. And I see in the Dolby Atmos renderer, obviously the objects in our original project were all routed to 714. Are we doing something wrong? Any Nuendo experts here? I don't know why if you make
I don't know.
714 it comes as 712.
Yeah,
Also,
that seems more like a question for a Nuendo,
Yeah.
like support group or something like that.
yeah, he gave me two questions. I think they're all based on Nuendo. John, unfortunately, I don't think we're experts on Nuendo, so I'm not sure we can answer that. Unfortunately. Let's go to the next one. Pedro. Hi, I'd like to know if they print the mix and stems as a Pro Tools bounce within Pro Tools or record directly to the renderer, because I noticed phase problems from a Pro Tools bounce.
We always print directly to the renderer.
Yeah, that's what I,
The timing is everything on this, especially when someone was mentioning it earlier, but fold downs actually from the Atmos session, making sure your pops are dead on is you got to spend time with it. And I had a problem with .6 with compensation not being correct, and so I actually had to move the stems around. But with .7, all that issue went away.
On my system, I have about a frame and a half of delay round trip to the renderer and back. So when I'm printing my stems in my Pro Tools session, basically I have my print stems that I destructively dub whenever I punch or whatever, but then all of my exports are copies of that shifted over, and so that my sync is on. But yeah, that was about I don't know how many milliseconds it is, but it's a frame and a half of delay.
and it's funny you say, Jamie, because I took your idea of creating the renderer within the Pro Tools system, but I made it a fascinating find where I had two systems. One was playing back dialogue and music. Then one was playing back effects and the renderer. Here's what we found out. That the system that's also tied to the recorder had pretty much very little delay. The second system that goes in, when you combine the two, had about a frame to a frame and a half delay. So we had our two pops. So at that point, that was right before Pro Tools expanded to 2,000 tracks. So when we were stuck at 750, I had to say, here's one player recorder, and then here's one player. And by doing that, we found the two pops were off about a frame and a half.
Was that the one going through the renderer?
No, that was actually just the delay between the machines compared to doing an internal busing.
Interesting. I wonder what causes that latency, because
We tried a couple of different tricks, and then we just decided, put it all, now we have a source machine and a recorder, and
Mhm.
don't fuse the two against each other.
That's
You
smart.
know, there's delay compensation issues for plugins, but we found that the time it takes to go to a recorder is slightly off. But if the recorder is in sync, then it's dead in sync, because you're not doing two different sources through two different timings.
Mhm.
I thought that was fascinating. JT, from Andrew. Hey, I'd love to know his thoughts on LFE use for music and how that translates to home theater. So
Yeah, you
LFE
know,
in the home theater, yeah.
yeah, for me, I love using as much mains as possible. And there's always been a 50-50 rule. I think a lot of people have that for themselves, and it works really, really well. And also, I don't, depending on what it is, but I don't let the low end just stay open. I always close the low end up starting around, depend on depending on the score, depending on the film, but starting around 50. I like to, even in the theater, I like to sort of take a little bit of that out until I need it. Because you're always trying to save so you can have those moments that are just so much different. And if you do that, generally it translates very well to the home theater. Sometimes it's safe I think, to make the home theater just a little bit punchier, but for the people that have the subs, you don't want to take away the fun for them either. So I'm not consistent on just here it is, go. It's always changing a little bit. Sometimes I open it up, sometimes they bring it back.
You know, it's just, we've got one other person, Adonis, and Chukatos. I'm not sure if I said it right. He phonetically put it out for me. We have people, by the way, all over the world listening. We have Rome and all these different people.
That's great.
The same when you jump from room to room, and I've noticed this as an editor. You know, when I hear people go, "Oh yes, my room translates 100%," and
Yeah.
I kind of,
Yeah.
you know, because your proximity to the speaker elements are different. When you've got a lot of air and you got a horn and things are pushing around a room, that's one kind of sound. When you're, how far am I? 4 or 5 feet away from a speaker, it just has different characteristics. So the question they're asking is, when you jump back and forth between a room, I see Scott's answering this a little bit too. When you go, how do you find going from a small room to a bigger room? Does it throw you? So I guess there's be a couple different people can answer this. The people that are mixing back and forth, and even editors, if you're on the stage, what are you finding? Does it throw you a little bit, or what?
I think I personally, I put so much of my life energy into, having the understanding of the translation of my room versus other rooms, that even when I'm just cutting stuff, I'm always sort of have that in mind of like, oh well, if it's gonna be subby here, it's not gonna be enough there, or like little things like that just sort of always generate in my mind. So I feel like over time you just sort of, once you learn your room really really well, its weaknesses and strengths, and going from room to room becomes much easier.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll say this, that one of the things I know I did with John and Frankie early on, I took some material that I brought to the stage, because the reality is I've mixed almost in every dubbing stage in LA, and they all sound different, similar but different. So a lot of times some you hear the surrounds ears, some have more bite, somehow tuned differently, even though theoretically they're not supposed to be different, but they are. So I was amazed because they had Myers, and I'm used to JBL, and I've always been a Myers fan, but I was like, I don't, let me understand what this is in this new room. I was amazed. I found that They're very smooth, be wonderful. I'm just a huge fan. I have two sets of speakers. I have, like I said, the JBL 708s and then the Barefoots. Interestingly enough, I found the Myers and the Barefoot sounded almost dead on because there was an articulation and a smoothness that both those speakers can be able to articulate. I found that the 708s were a little different because they were a little bitier. They had that horn bite a little bit. Also, it depends when you deal with JBLs. I find that the 708s sound better 6 to 8 feet away, but if you're really close to them, they can be a little bright, a little sharp. And again, even you try to tune for it, but it is what it is. I don't think it made me, it wouldn't have changed my decisions in how I would approach the sounds. But even when we went to John's and he was doing the 708 emulator, I could hear that. I knew that sound a little bit compared to other things. Again, it doesn't necessarily change the way I would design, but I can hear it. Scott, we got a question for you. Can you elaborate? And yeah, because this is fascinating. Do you want to just quickly talk about the ambio spatial thing that you're doing for stereo listeners?
Sure. Yeah. First, I'll say that we're on a product journey here, just like the whole industry is, and all of this group is, and our spatial audio product is going to change over time. We found that Sennheiser had a good solution we could license and adopt that was true to the Sennheiser brand, which is clean. And that's always been an important value for me. It's something I've appreciated from Dolby. At least what Dolby has always strived for is a clean sound. And it really important for me to be respectful to the content because I come from being a mixer and this community. So one conservative choice that we made with it is to skip processing on LCR completely. We don't process LCR with spatial audio. They pass through like a low-row. And we do all the spatialization treatment on the surround field. We can do that because it's for speakers. It's not for headphones. You can't really do that for headphones. They have to be placed in a space, not necessarily with an HRTF, but you have to place it in a space for a binaural render. So it's conservative. Most of the storytelling is happening in LCR. We're not processing that. We just want to add some more impact and space to the surrounds. Also, our solution is tuned for close devices right now, laptops, and we might rethink that and tune more for TVs in the future. Although on a TV, if it's across the room from you, it's hard to get any sense of space. You're not in that magic triangle, of listening like you need for stereo. So it's a debate. The point is that, and this is kind of a good takeaway is for everyone, is we're in a world full of constraints. The consumer devices are this massive grayscale from ultra hi-fi Meyer ATC PMC to terrible 50-cent speaker in your TV, and it's all the way, and spatial audio is the same way. It's full of compromises. The ideal solutions are not practical for consumers. Modeling the head, modeling the room, knowing the room, all of that is not practical. So full of constraints, full of decisions, and you have to be respectful to the content, to the filmmakers. You have to be conservative with it. We really have a Hippocratic oath for audio solutions at Netflix. It's don't do any harm first before anything else. We don't think we're benevolently coming up with some new technology that's going to make everything better. We think what's best was what was done in the original mix room. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but that's my philosophy, and so it's the philosophy that we're applying to this. And we're not trying to sell devices, so it's easy for me to do that. We're not trying to make a very sticky, consumer-friendly experience. We're more concerned with the creative relationships and making a noticeable experience, something that people can really hear. It is magical with the right content to hear the sound all around you. Love that. It won't necessarily always be powered by Sennheiser, but it is for now, and we feel pretty good about it. We do get buy-in for every single version, so there isn't a spatial audio ambio version on Netflix that the mixer hasn't approved, or some part of the sound team hasn't approved, and that's held us back. It'd be a lot easier to just encode the full Atmos library in this, but we want to get the buy-in from each and every sound person.
That's great. I think this is a great way to end this. Again, we have one more. We have the last webinar, webinar 5, coming up in 2 weeks. And that's going to be kind of a wrap up. We're going to discuss a little bit of everything. And I know a lot of people have had questions, and we'll probably hit a bunch of topics. I just want to let everybody again know, go to the EIPMA website, EIPMA website.org. Again, this is new. This is all of us who have all this knowledge, just trying to give back people that are up and coming, people that are learning, coffee with audio people. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. I also want to thank, obviously, all the panelists. You guys rock. I mean, there's so much. Every panel we do, everyone walks away with going, "Wow, I learned quite a bit." Each from the different panel members. I also want to thank my co-people in creating this, which was Sherry Klein, Richard McKernan, Maureen Downey, Bernard Weiser, Karen Dunn. Thank you for making this all happen. Also, EIPMA is a nonprofit organization, so if you feel like you want to donate, feel free. We all do this just because we're insane, and this is what we do. And again, we'll be putting links up just for those people that are wondering, or in about a week, it'll be going on to the YouTube website, where you could watch this. And it's been massively successful. We've had over 500 people listening offline per webinar. And it's really getting out there. We've been having quite a bit live. Again, I really thank everybody for taking a Saturday, wherever you are in the world, if it's your night or your morning, and these guys who are working around the clock. Anyway, we want to thank everybody. So other than that, I think that's it for this one, and we'll see you on the next one. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
And this is water,
Thanks,
by the
Scott.
way, not beer.